panelists to come join us up here at the table, the front table here. Here you go. Okay. All right. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alicia Ordway. I'm the Employer Engagement Director at the Boston Private Industry Council. And I'm delighted to be here today with two other Alicias. Oh, wow. That's right. And an Annie. So the 4 A's this afternoon. To talk with you a little bit about the evolving world of youth employment. Through my work, I often get to collaborate and speak with peers in other cities, and they're often very envious of the rich youth employment ecosystem that we have here in Boston. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. First, we will have Alicia Rouault, who will lead us through a discussion around the tech-enabled process of the city's Division of Youth Engagement and Employment's hiring process. Annie Duong-Turner will talk about the MLK Scholars program through John Hancock. And finally, Dr. Alicia Modestino will talk about the impact youth summer employment has had in addressing inequalities through both short and long-term impacts. All right, take it away.
Excellent. Great. I'm going to just stand at the podium. Good. Super. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk today about a project that we worked on over the last 2 years to really meet youth where they're at in Boston, and how we sort of strove to improve access to summer jobs using data technology and youth-centered design. So my name is Alicia Rouault. I lead the digital services team at the Metropolitan Area Planning Councils. We're the regional planning agency for 101 cities and towns in Metro Boston. So we were brought together 2 years ago around a project called the Boston Civic Tech Data Collaborative. MEPC was the technical lead, but we worked on this project in close partnership with the Boston Division of Youth Engagement and Employment, which is the youth outreach division for the city of Boston, as well as the Department of Innovation and Technology. We also had some advisory support from volunteers from Code for Boston, the Department of Economics at MIT, the Boston Indicators Project, and we were supported through a grant from MacArthur Foundation, BNY Mellon, and coordinated through Living Cities. So one of the aspects of this project, so we were brought together in this collaborative. We were one of multiple other cities that were sort of organized around specific topics. And in Boston, we were organized around the topic of youth employment. So why do we care about youth employment? Well, one of the reasons, and this is sort of a graph from 538 blog, is that we see that summer employment rates have been in decline over the last few decades. And that sort of the lower someone's income is, the less likely they are to have a summer job, and that we see Black and Latino youth job rates more in decline than for white youth. And we know that having a summer job is often the first introduction to the workforce, right? This is sort of really your first experience having a job. We know through study after study, and you're going to hear this in much more detail from Alicia later, around the positive long-term outcomes that are associated with having a summer job. So things like a decrease in risky and violent behavior and arrests. We saw that in a study about Chicago. And we also have seen that we have higher graduation and attendance rates associated with youth who have summer employment, which is why so many cities across the country are investing in municipal summer youth employment programs. And the city of Boston has been doing this for quite some time. The city of Boston began their youth employment program, I believe, in 1990. And the way that it works today is jobs are organized through 4 intermediaries. So there's ABCD, there's the PIC, where Alicia works, MLK Scholars, and the Division of Youth Employment and Engagement is the entity that we chose to work with. So this is the city of Boston administering jobs directly to young people through a program called SuccessLink. And SuccessLink is open to every young person in Boston, whereas some of the other programs either income restricted or require that you're a BPS student. So we initially began this project by mapping the end-to-end process and all the regulatory steps that have to go through this system within the city of Boston. So we did this journey map. We mapped out the different departments, the different bottlenecks, and we really discovered a whole bunch of barriers to entry on the city side, on the city staff side, but also the youth's experience of that. We also knew that going into this project, outreach was time consuming, right? So historically, the Division of Youth Engagement and Employment spent 15 minutes per person on the phone trying to reach young people to just offer them a job. And if you think that there were thousands upon thousands of applicants each year, this is a really untenable activity for such a small division to undertake. We also leaned into user experience design. We use an approach called user-centered design, where we really believe in working with the people who will actually use our technology to design it. And in this case, that was youth. So we organized a series of focus groups, and throughout the 2-year process, really engaged young people in every step of the design and research moments. And as a result of this, we had some phenomenal insight that we would have never reached on our own as experts, which really informed how we built the tool. So this is all baked into a platform that we rolled out called the Youth Summer Jobs Platform. If you want to learn about it in more detail, you can visit youthjobs.mapc.org. And it allows young people to understand where they are in the hiring process, right? This is information that they historically did not have access to viewing. It allows young people to search and request for specific positions that they have interest in based on categories of industry interest, but also simply seeing where a job is on a map was a huge improvement to how this was done in the past. We also allow the community-based organizations who employ these young people to see what youth are interested in. So a young person can flag that they would want to work for a specific place, and the employer can see that that young person wants to work for them. City staff can manage this information, the available jobs. They can sort of field questions from parents who call in and say, does my kid have a job yet? And they can actually see this information in a dashboard. And then they can actually run a jobs lottery. So half of these positions are sort of selected directly by the employers, right? So a young person says they want the job, the employer will sort of offer them one. But 50% of the jobs are actually distributed through a lottery process. So this means that anyone who applies for a job has an equal chance of getting one. And so the dashboard is a place for the city staff to actually run this lottery. And we built behind the lottery an algorithm that takes into consideration a lot of the preferences that young people had. We also made a way for city staff to send text messages to allow youth to understand that they have a job offer. A big problem before was that people just didn't know that they had a job offer. So using text messages was like an incredibly successful outreach method. And, it kind of looks like this. Congrats, you got a summer job offer. Please check your email. You must still upload documents. And youth were great. They sent us back emojis. They were really excited about it. So there were a lot of different outcomes, and I'm going to kind of go through this quickly because I don't have tons of time. But in year one, we used email alone to offer someone a job. And we saw sort of a little bit of an uptick in acceptance rates, but not much. And so after discussing this with Alicia and other folks and interviewing young people, we realized that a major assumption we had made was actually off, that young people do not use their email in summer months. They associate it with school. It's not something teenagers tend to use during the summer, but they do use text message. And so we rolled out text message outreach in year two, and we saw that 56% more job offers were accepted after we introduced text message. We also increased more qualitative experiences. So we ran a lot of the responses that we got back from text messages through this IBM Watson sentiment generator. And we heard that more often than not, we elicited a feeling of joy. There was some sadness and confusion, but this was a really incredible metric of just how folks were actually experiencing this process. We were really happy to see that. From efficiency's sake, we saved 19 work weeks or 95 days that would have been spent on the phone calling people. And ultimately, through the rollout of this platform, in year 2, 20% more youth were hired. So this was a really wonderful success. Quickly, the lessons. A lot of this project was about documenting things that were never documented before, right? And this allowed us to measure new information that could actually improve the running of the program within the city. We were building technology in an agile, iterative, rapid way, and as a result of that, public policy actually also began to iterate. So we were sort of doing this technology development alongside public policy development. And through the platform, we were able to prototype tweaks and changes to public policy that we wouldn't have normally seen. So the next steps is really to transition the management of this platform over to the City of Boston, and the digital services team has taken it on, and they're going to support it in future years. But we'd also like to see it go to more communities. And if you'd like to bring this model to your city, many of you are probably from Boston, so I'm not sure that that's relevant, but if you'd like to bring this to other places or adapt the code base, check it out. It's all open source on GitHub. Also, MAPC is hiring. I'd love to talk. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So, Alicia, would you like to come up next? Okay, great.
The good thing is that Alicia just saved me a lot of time in explaining what the program is and what it does. I'm going to talk more about the impacts. And in case you're interested, most of what I'm going to say today is in this report that the City of Boston, the Office of Workforce Development, issued in late December. So you can find a lot of the results right in here that I'm going to talk about today. I don't know, who remembers the first summer job that they had? Does everyone remember their first summer job, right? What was your first summer job, Chris?
Shelving books.
Shelving books, awesome. How about you, Alicia?
Produce Plus, Slice and Delegate.
Nice. Midori, what was your first job? Nice. I was a camp counselor at the YMCA, like a lot of kids who go through the program. And you probably all, if you reflect on it now, realize that you did learn something from that first summer job, even if it was the case that you never wanted to spend your entire life shelving books or working in produce or being a camp counselor or whatever it might be. But all these experiences do add up. So I wanted to acknowledge my partners in this, the Office of Workforce Development, Midori and Trin, who have been instrumental the entire way along. I went to Trin several years ago and said, I want to study the summer jobs program. She's like, great, tell me what works, tell me what doesn't. We want to improve on it. We also received funding from third sector partners as part of a pay-for-performance feasibility study, so I want to acknowledge that as well. And then also my community-based partners that include a lot of the people in this room that were already mentioned, but Joe McLaughlin from the Boston Pick, Annie and her team from MLK, Rashad Cope from BCYF, the folks at Youth Options Unlimited, and also Mark Eisenberg and his team at ABCD. So why are we focusing on inequality? I really wanted to tie it to the theme of this conference. First of all, youth present us with a unique opportunity to address inequality because there's actually been an increase over time in the share of youth who aren't employed or not in school, and this group has now been called Opportunity Youth. Early work experience has been shown to be important in previous studies, so this facilitates the transition from school to work. It's also linked with future employment down the line. And if we don't employ this population, there's actually big consequences, right, that are quite costly in terms of providing different benefits, as well as other types of things like incarceration. And then finally, as we've seen over the last several decades, we're in a period of rising inequality. So really the stakes have never been higher for this group in terms of being successful in getting to the top of the ladder. This is very similar to the data that Alicia already showed you, but you can see as of 2001 right there, the teen employment rate, so this is the employment to population ratio, that's that red line, is the one line that has been going down fairly consistently. I mean, it still shows a little bit of a cyclical blip here and there, but we are far below the level of youth employment that we've seen in previous decades. And part of that is that teens are doing other stuff, right? So like my kids are in summer programs, they do internship that don't get captured necessarily by employment data. I'm not worried about those kids. There's a whole other group of kids who want to work in the summer and for whom a job is really important, especially if they're not going to be going on to college to be able to learn some kind of skill or some kind of trade. And we've actually been seeing over time a consistent increase in the share of youth who are reporting that they're unemployed because they're just entering the labor market. They're having a hard time finding that first job. And so that's what's led to lots of cities around the country, Boston, Chicago, New York, DC, to really rely even more heavily on their jobs program, not just as a way to keep kids busy during the summer, but really to provide them with more meaningful employment experiences and improve longer-term outcomes. So how can summer youth employment programs improve outcomes? We look at 3 different areas. The first is boosting job readiness. It's a workforce development program. That should be a pretty obvious goal, right? But having the experience of exploring different careers, learning to write a resume, learning to search for jobs, to interview are really important skills in today's labor market. Also, raising academic achievement through aspirations, right? So a lot of times youth are being exposed to different careers, particularly through the PIC. They have a lot of private sector jobs, which is very unique to Boston compared to other cities. And so youth are getting to look at careers at State Street. They're looking at careers at Mass General, right? Things that are very different. And also improving community engagement and social skills. So providing mentoring relationships with adults and peers that develop sort of a sense of agency and identity. And I'm going to move a little faster through this, but one of the things that I didn't realize until my oldest looked for a job was that this can really provide youth with a sense of achievement, right, that can carry over beyond just the summer experience, particularly if you're not the best student, right? If you're a hardworking, good kid, right, you can get a lot of satisfaction out of having a job. So what did we do? We've engaged in a multi-year evaluation with the city that's now funded by the William T. Grant Foundation for the next several years. And what we want to do is assess the impact of the Boston Summer Youth Employment Program on both the short-term impacts that occur during the summer as well as longer-term outcomes that happen in the 1 to 2 years after participating. And we really want to understand not only whether the summer jobs program improves outcomes for youth, but also how these impacts are achieved, right? We've already seen in Chicago it improves crime. Why? What's the mechanism there? How can we replicate it in other cities or other programs? It improves attendance and graduation rates. Why? How? What is going on there that could be captured and applied to other contexts? We also want to examine specific program features, particularly for the city, so they can best spend their resources to impact the most youth and to get the biggest bang for their buck. So looking at things with the PIC, like what's the value of having a private sector versus a public sector job, looking at the career readiness program and how much value that adds during the summer, because it's not a small thing to be able to roll this out while you're also matching kids to jobs and sending them off to employers. And then finally, how many summers do we need to get in effect? A lot of kids participate more than one summer. If you only need one, then maybe we should limit you to one and serve as many youth as possible. I mean, we have a randomized lottery because there are more kids applying than there are jobs. If you need 2 or 3, then we should make sure you get 2 or 3, right? So we can actually get those good outcomes down the road. So what does this evaluation do? As I said, we're linking these short-term summer incomes that come off a pre-post survey that happens during the summer, and we're measuring things like community engagement, job readiness skills, academic aspirations, and they're linking it to administrative records on arraignments, looking at arraignments for different types of crimes, the share of youth arraigned, the rate of recidivism, but also other types of administrative records as well, including school records that include attendance and course grades and test scores, as well as employment and wage records. So I'm going to skip over the context because we've already been told a lot about how this program works. I'm going to focus today on results from ABCD because they are the one intermediary that exclusively uses random assignment to assign kids to jobs. Of the youth that applied during the summer of 2015, for which all of this is based on, about 1,100, 1,200 or so were offered a job via random assignment. That was about 28%. So that left about 3,000 in the control group, and about 84% or so accepted a job offer. So it's a very high take-up rate among those who are offered a job. And that gives us a really robust control group then to compare outcomes for. And so what we're going to do is use just a simple comparison of means. What was the average, number of arraignments per youth for the treatment group versus the control group? We're also going to control for other observable characteristics, although, when it's truly randomly assigned, we don't have to really worry too much about that. And then we're also going to use a mediation analysis to try to link those short-term outcomes to the longer-term impacts that we're observing, to be able to say something about the mechanisms behind the program. So this is just showing you the baseline demographics of the treatment versus the control group. There's virtually no statistically significant differences, which reassures us that it's randomly assigned. And you can also see that ABCD primarily serves a very low-income population, so exactly the population that we're worried about when we're thinking about issues of inequality. What was really of concern to the city was learning about whether or not this was an effective program as well. So if it's a case that youth can run off and find a job on their own, then maybe this isn't as meaningful an experience, but we found that only about 25% of youth actually found a job on their own during the summer based on our survey. And also youth in the program work more hours per week, and they tend to work in a lot of community-based jobs. Okay, so from the survey data, we saw huge improvements in terms of social skills and community engagement. So everything from better attitudes towards their communities, which at first was a little surprising to me, and then I realized a lot of these kids are in community-based jobs, and actually one of my kids now is a lifeguard at the Y. He knows everybody in town, right, compared to me. And so it just gives them a very different way to interact with their community. But also big improvements in social skills, particularly for African-American males in terms of things like how to manage emotions, how to ask for help when you need it, how to constructively resolve conflict with a peer, all of the things that have been linked with reductions in criminal activity and delinquency. In terms of academic aspirations, participants were actually less likely to say they were going to work in the fall, which maybe was a little surprising at first, but then when you think about it, they just got work experience in the summer, so maybe they don't feel like they have to work in the fall, which could be a good thing. They could focus more on school. And they were also more likely to aspire to go to a 2- or 4-year college after high school. And so there's definitely some kind of improvement in terms of academic aspirations, although most of that is showing up for females, for African American Hispanic females, which is consistent with other research where we've seen African American females outpacing males in terms of attending college. In terms of job readiness skills, really the group outperformed the control group across 7 out of 11 job readiness measures. There were larger impacts for African American and Hispanic males, but this was very reassuring to us because this is the stuff the curriculum was supposed to teach them, and so it was nice, I think, to see this result of what happened over the summer. Okay, so what happened in terms of long-term results? So here I'm going to show you data from DCJIS on arraignments. I'm going to show you data from Boston Public Schools on academic outcomes, and I'm going to show you wage and employment records from DUA. In terms of criminal justice outcomes, we found that the number of arrests per youth for violent crimes among the treatment group decreased by 35%. There was an even greater percentage to decrease in crime for property crimes, not much for other types of crimes, and not much difference in terms of seriousness, so misdemeanor versus felony. What was really interesting to us is a lot of the rationale for the summer jobs program is that you're keeping them off the streets and out of trouble, but that happens during the day, and a lot of crime happens at night. So it's not a very good explanation. And in fact, that's not what's going on. You can even see during the program, relative to the control group, crimes among the treatment group actually tick up slightly, although it's not statistically significant. And then it falls, and it continues to fall cumulatively over the next 17 to 18 months, which suggests this is something more than just incapacitating them during the day. It has something to do with a change in behavior. We found most of the impact was for Black and Hispanic males among varying ages. There wasn't really a significant reduction for females, although not a lot of females are reducing crime or engaged in crime. And then the really interesting thing for us is if you relate those impacts over the summer to the reductions in crime that we see over the next 18 months, of all the things that we measured over the summer that kids improve upon, their work readiness skills, their academic aspirations, their social skills and community engagement, the one thing that's related to the reduction in crime are those social skills in terms of managing emotions and resolving conflict. And so that was very interesting to us as sort of a takeaway, and it is very consistent with other research like in Chicago around the Becoming a Man project. Very quickly, in terms of administrative outcomes, From the BPS data that we got, we saw improvements in the attendance rate, which boosted some kids over the average attendance rate being above 85%, which is what is considered to be sort of meaningful for going to school, reduced the days of unexcused absences. A lot of these impacts were greater for older students, right? So if you're over 16, you can drop out. So these were more impactful for older students as well as male and Hispanics. And it was also related to improving social skills and increasing aspirations. We didn't see any improvement in overall GPA, but we did see a reduction in course failures, which if you think about it, if you're at least showing up every day, you're probably not going to fail, right? Which is very useful for maybe high school graduation down the road, which we haven't been able to see yet with this cohort, but hopefully we will this summer with some data that we're getting from the state. In terms of employment and wage outcomes, it's a lot trickier thing to measure. And that's because these are school-aged youth, and so they are more likely to be doing things like going to school, engaging in extracurricular activities, all sorts of things, maybe to get into college rather than working. And so for ages 14 to 18 years, we actually saw lower employment after participation in the treatment group relative to the control group. But for the older kids that we did have in our cohort, age 19 to 24 years, we did see an increase in employment and wages, and that was mostly among minority youth. And so this is the path over time for African American males aged 19 to 24 in terms of their employment and wages before and also after the program. And there's a slight tick up after participating in the program, and the same thing in terms of wages as well. So it's a slight, maybe could be temporary boost, we don't really know for sure, but it does seem to signal something in the labor market. So what are we doing beyond? And what are some of the things that we've learned? We're going to improve on the survey. Every year we kind of look at it and we take out questions that aren't very informative. We simplify questions. I've learned a lot about surveying youth, including things like don't ever email them because they're never going to respond to you. And we've added in some questions that are tied more to national scale so we can actually make those comparisons. We've also improved how to deploy our survey to do more during onboarding and orientation to get a better response rate, using a variety of means to contact the control group, and also doing things like analyzing which job sites are missing so that we can go back and ask them for that. And then also, in terms of obtaining administrative records, we've done things like including the BPS ID on the application form, makes it a lot easier to match up with administrative records and things like that. And then finally, we'll be going into studying those different program features to be able to say something about dosage, about how long these effects last, as well as the types of jobs that are important and how much the Signal Success curriculum contributes. Thank you.
Okay, to round out everything that you've heard so far, Annie's going to present on Don Hancock's MLK Scholars program.
Thank you. A little bit short here. So I'm going to out myself here. I'm not an academic. I'm a program manager. So I'm not going to show you guys any fancy tables or charts, but I'm here to tell you about our company's MLK Scholars program, why we do it, why does John Hancock invest $1 million annually in this program, and how we do it and what we hope to achieve down the road. So we're still very much new to the evaluation part in terms of collaborating with the city, but what I hope that you guys can take away from my talk today is thinking about how program managers and practitioners and funders can participate in civic research. So first off, what is MLK Scholars? It is a cross-sector collaboration with John Hancock at the forefront as the primary financial sponsor of the program, and in partnership with the Boston Globe, Partners Healthcare, Boston University, the city, of course, and the Ad Club. And we also receive significant logistical support from Boston Cares, the Center for Teen Empowerment, and EverFi. And through this program, we serve 650 youth annually in partnership with an additional 65 nonprofit partners. And we are now going into the 11th year of this program. And why are we doing this? The MLK Scholars program really puts John Hancock's core values at the forefront because we believe creating healthier, more equitable communities will make decisions easier and lives better for all people in our community. Of course, based on the title of this conference, economic empowerment and financial knowledge is not accessible to everyone. And what we hope to achieve through the MLK Scholars program is to level the playing field by providing job opportunities and learning opportunities in the communities that we serve. And in doing so, we hope to create shared value for individuals, the scholars that we serve, the communities, businesses, and nonprofits. And for how we do it, our mission statement of the program is to provide meaningful employment opportunities for Boston youth selected for their leadership potential. And we really think about the key areas of our impact in 3 different ways. First off, Boston's youth will be better prepared to join the workforce, having developed critical workforce readiness and job searching skills at their work sites. And Boston's employers, and by employers I mean not only businesses but also nonprofits and anyone who employs anyone in Boston, will be strengthened by hiring from a pipeline of diverse and prepared young people that we develop through this program. And Boston's communities will benefit from citywide convenings that break down neighborhood silos. And in doing so, we will promote positive connections and understanding between the scholars and the adults that they interact with through our program, improvement in public conversation regarding youth and neighborhood needs, investments, programming, and summer jobs, and increased investments by corporates in summer job programs. And of course, there's also a lot of immediate impact from this program in that the nonprofits that we work with are typically smaller community-based organizations who really rely on the funding from our program to provide additional support in furthering their missions over the summer. And the program structure. The program really starts in the winter when we make decisions about our grant allocations. What makes our program unique is that the MLK Scholars program is very much a grant program in that we make decisions on which nonprofits to fund. And the nonprofits apply to us with a number of slots or scholars that they're able to host during the summer. And we make decisions based on the extent of meaningful employment that they're able to provide at the organizations. And we define that as having a structured learning plan, mentorship, supervision opportunities, and other exploration opportunities at the nonprofits. And we allocate a grant of $1,825 per scholar position awarded. And the nonprofits have a great degree of flexibility with this funding, and that's another component that makes this program unique. The nonprofits are able to recruit, hire, manage, and pay the scholars directly. More often than not, the nonprofits are hiring students within the communities they serve, and they may also be participants at that nonprofit through some other program already. And when we say this is a program that's for leadership development or leadership potential, we're really looking for nonprofits who are able to extend that relationship with that young person and give them more of a leadership opportunity at their organization. And we have four very simple criteria for the program participation for the scholars. They have to have that demonstrated leadership potential. They're full-time residents of City of Boston. They fit within our preferred target age range of 16 through 18, and they have to be able to attend all 4 of our Mayor Menino leadership forums. And during the spring, we shift gears and we focus on working with our nonprofit partners closely to make this program a success. During that time, we offer capacity building workshops for our nonprofit partners who are working directly with the young people. And that includes things like trauma awareness training and communications training. And we also solicit our nonprofits' input for our summer programming. And during the summer is when we really activate the program and engage the scholars more deeply. The scholars will work for 20 to 25 hours a week at a nonprofit worksite. In addition, they attend the Mayor Menino Leadership Forums, which are a series of professional development workshops that cover topics ranging from civic engagement, financial literacy, personal brand, etc. And we also offer an online financial literacy curriculum that's accessible mobile and in different languages as well. And during the fall, we work very closely with Dr. Modestino and our external evaluator, Julia Gittleman, to launch our evaluation portion. And our nonprofits complete an organizational survey, which is very programmatic in nature, but we also ask them to facilitate the youth surveys. And from those youth surveys and organizational surveys, we've learned a lot over the past few years. In 2017, we can say, we can report out on inputs and very broadly attitudinal and behavioral outcomes. Like we can say that 65 nonprofits employed 642 youth in 2017. 92% of scholars report that as a result of participating in our program, they are better prepared to be successful in the workplace in the future. And that means that they understand that there are rewards for hard work or consequences for not so hard work, receiving and using feedback, and also when to communicate with their managers and how to do so. And they also reported gaining confidence and awareness of their position in the work environment. They understand that there is a responsibility. It's very different being a participant versus a staff member at an organization. And of course, we also know that 86% of our scholars participated in our online financial literacy curriculum, of which 84% said that they learned something new about making good personal finance decisions. Now, as I said before, we're going into our 11th summer now, and looking back at the 10 years, we can, we have some nice numbers to share. We know that we served approximately 4,000 youth, and that over 6,000 jobs were created through our program. But so what? We just really, we can speak to like cross-sectional at a point in time outcomes, but we really don't know what the, or we really don't have the data to back up what the ultimate impact of this program is. We have anecdotal evidence. I mean, we have stories. Every year we know that there are a handful of former MLK scholars who have come back and are now managing MLK scholars at the nonprofit and organizations that they worked with or at other nonprofits. And I myself was an MLK scholar far too long ago. So we have, stories like that, which are, powerful and inspiring, but we just can't really apply that to the broader audience that we serve. As such, last summer we started working with the city and Dr. Modestino to implement parts of her survey in our existing youth survey. And that was pretty effective. We learned, there are some similarities and differences between our programs. And going into next year, we're still figuring out the logistics of how this will work, but we will also begin collecting PII information and figure out to what extent that we can match that up to the administrative data. And right now we're being challenged with balancing the efficiency and also data privacy risks. As a corporate entity, there are limitations to what we can collect and how we can use that information. And that will require us to work very closely with our legal and privacy team and also with our nonprofit partners to make sure that our participants are aware of how they're using the information and that they understand why we're doing this as well. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we have some time for conversation. Any questions just for clarification around the data? We have a rich array of sort of data on the front end of just this high volume Success Link program offered by the mayor. We've got the depth of analysis on the impact of all these these work experiences at ABCD. And then I didn't realize, MLK, congratulations on 10 years. That's a lot of young people served on a rich program. So, questions from the audience? Chris.
This is for our friend Alicia at MAPC.
Which one?
Yeah.
1,000 questions for you, Alicia. You talked about how it obviously was challenging to bring the different processes around getting a youth summer job into a platform. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that struck me as really nice and interesting was that where am I in the process? I assume that data is sourced from some kind of operational automatic capture process within the job providing entity, mm-hmm. and is somehow deposited in a database, which is also somehow externally facing or interconnected so you can hit it from a web-based platform. How hard was it? What was your level of effort to set that up? Was that already there? Were they already using some kind of custom-built software that the database was already being populated, and you just had to hit the database in an external way? Or how did that evolve? That seems like potentially one of the thorniest problems to solve.
Yeah, I think you're sort of hitting the nail right in the head there. This was ultimately an integration project, right, with the city of Boston. So we had to integrate with the city's existing system that's called ISIMS, which is a talent acquisition management system. So the city of Boston, when they hire staff, uses a piece of software. So it's called ISIMS. What was happening is that within the Division of Youth Engagement and Employment, there were a lot of ad hoc processes happening. So there was management of people in Google Docs and spreadsheets. There was sort of no tracking of like all the moments that happened in outreach up until the point that they would need to go through the city's official HR system. So what we tried to do was to codify, document, and then turn into actual software all those moments prior to hitting the city system. And then we could have all of that information in a database, which would allow us to sort of measure performance and evaluate what was happening or wasn't. But then also building that system to truly integrate with the system that the city's legal, HR departments, all the other sort of back of the office systems that they have to use for legal reasons, and make sure that the two are talking to each other.
So did you actually build that system and train people to use it?
We built that front-end interface, so what the young person experiences. We built the guts behind that, so like the software that the staff can actually use. And then we built that API to integrate with the city's existing hiring system, which was absolutely the hardest part of this project.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. I should ask if you could just stand and introduce yourself before asking your question. That would be fabulous. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Laurel Eakins, and I'm the Director of Fair Policy and Analytics at the MBTA. And so I have a question around, the MBTA, working actually with City of Boston's Youth Engagement Office, implemented the Youth Pass, and 2 years ago, we also made a bunch of changes to the Student Pass. So now BPS students who get their Student Charlie card through their school have access to our Student Pass over the summer for the first time ever. So I'm wondering if there's any way you guys have we've done some research trying to figure out the impacts of that, but if you've sort of thought about how to calculate or figure out the impacts of access to jobs now that all young people in Boston effectively have the ability to get $30 league passes over the summer when they previously didn't have that.
I can comment. I can't say that we've evaluated access to opportunities, but one sort of, it's funny how these policies implement, or when these policy changes are implemented, sometimes there are administrative consequences. So one of the things, we organize the employer paid, employer supervised component of the Summer Jobs Campaign, and a lot of the employers like to pay for the students' T-passes. And what we encountered last summer was it was hard for them to buy the passes in bulk because it was so distributed with each student, whereas before they would just go to the MBTA and buy 30 passes and hand them out to the kids. But I think we have a workaround for this year. But it definitely makes it different. I mean, transportation, it's funny the things that you take for granted and how significant they are in terms of students, showing up for the first day. They don't want to come to their teacher or counselor and say, I can't get to my first day of work. I mean, it's huge. Or I don't have money the first week of my job to have lunch. These little things become insurmountable barriers for young people. So it's very helpful at various levels, I imagine. But I don't know if you guys want to add.
Oh, I was just going to say, like in the data that we've collected, we also collect a lot of financial capability type of data, including what kids spend their money on. So first of all, over half of our kids spend some portion of their summer earnings on household bills. So everything from helping with rent to paying with utilities to paying their own cell phone bill. I know I'd love it if my kids paid their own cell phone bill. And part of that is a T-pass and transportation. So, I mean, that would just make their dollars go further this summer if they have access to that. I think that would.
But they did last summer as well.
Yeah.
So last summer was the first summer when there was the ability to buy the $30 pass on all of our fare vending machines with your student Charlie card.
So I'd be curious to know even just what the take-up rate is, so we know, do kids know about it? How do they do it? Do they plan ahead? Probably not. My kids don't plan at all ahead, right? So, so that would be fascinating to know how that rolled out.
We do have some data on how many sales we had over the summer and then last summer, and I'm curious to see how this summer, if sort of word has gotten out, because that was the first summer when your Charlie card didn't expire at the end of school, when you could keep using it through the summer, as long as you don't lose it. But I think that it's a bit confusing for BPS kids who traditionally have gotten their pass paid for by Boston Public Schools, and so they've never had to go to a fare vending machine and figure out how to load the $30 pass on it.
Right.
And so that we did some education around that, but I think there's more to be done as we head into next summer about that. And the issue around the bulk sales hopefully will be solved when our new magic fare collection system in a couple of years.
Okay, cool.
But that is a problem that we've experienced on the youth pass side as well, of like how we let other people pay, because the model we were asked for from the youth who organized the campaign around this was to be able to everyone be able to get it on the fare vending machine. So that's how the program was designed.
Got you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we certainly didn't measure this or research it, but it came up anecdotally quite a bit. Was sort of I kind of glazed over this in the presentation, but there was an algorithm that was behind all of this to actually match young people to jobs. And one of the things that came up over and over again was that youth were concerned about how am I actually going to get to the job if, like, I live in East Boston and I'm offered a job in Roxbury. So we looked at travel time. Then we also looked at access to a T-Pass. And Rashad Cope, the director of DYEE, brought that up immediately. He's like, yeah, you can't use your BPS bus pass in the summer. Like, so I think I think following up with him would be a really good thing to do. And okay, great. Yeah, so he might be able to provide. I know that they capture sort of why folks decline jobs, so you might be able to sort of look into that as a data set.
Awesome. So another hand. Yep.
I guess I'll stand. Thank you all so much for the work that you do. I'm also kind of in youth employment and entrepreneurship, so I appreciate your work a lot. So one of the question that I'll ask is really going back to the theme of the conference, which is confronting inequality and economic mobility. So I feel like the work that you all do definitely does both, but because inequality is very institutionalized, and in some sense, not in some sense, I guess in general, it's reinforced by like individuals' ideologies, right, who are in the system that we live in. It seems like because I think the max age that your organization serve is 24 and 18. I think those were the two ages, max ages. So I wanted to know what your organizations do in terms of ensuring that the workforce is an equitable space for the youth that will eventually age out of your programs and continue in the workforce that is, in some sense, still a part of the institutionalized inequality that we have in our city.
Yeah, well, I think certainly part of the motivation of the program is to be able to provide opportunity, right, to reduce these inequalities across group, and that's why we've been disaggregating our results across age, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and we were encouraged to see that it did appear to reduce some of those inequalities. It did appear to reduce differences in terms of criminal arraignments, in terms of academic outcomes, in terms of employment. And I think it's an important, sort of beginning step maybe towards providing more equity in the workplace, in the sense that a lot of times these things are place-based, right? And so a lot of the participants are growing up in neighborhoods, that have a lot of crime, that have failing schools, that don't have a lot of job opportunities, right? And so the program is designed to provide some employment opportunities, right, to help sort of counteract, or at least provide those opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be there. Your question about how does it carry forward is a really important one, and I think there's two ideas I'll leave you with. One is that I I think it's actually pretty amazing to get these kinds of impacts off a 6-week program, right? I think when I first started doing this work, I was just using the survey data because, we had to wait for kids to have experiences to then collect the administrative data. And when I first presented the survey data, I was just glad to see that the stuff that was taught over the summer, like learning to write a resume or, interview or things like that, showed up in these results because it just reinforced or it confirmed what the people on the ground were seeing. And then the longer term stuff was a total roll of the dice because we really didn't know if it was going to have a longer term impact. So it's nice that it does, but again, you see at least in the employment outcomes that we've seen, it appears somewhat temporary at this point for those older minority youth. And so maybe it gives them that entree into the labor force where they've had prior work experience and they have an employer who's going to vouch for them to get that next job. But I think a lot of what we've been talking about with the city is how do you build on that experience? How do you link them to the next opportunity that's going to build on those positive experiences that they're having to further level the playing field? But I will say, one of the things that we've been talking about with employers is that this is also an important tool for them. And I know a lot of employers around the Boston area, including the Boston Fed, where I used to work before I was at Northeastern, their summer jobs program is basically their diversity program. So there are people working at the Boston Fed, people of color, who started as summer interns, right? There's people like Annie who work at MLK who started as summer job kids. And you do see this repeated all across the city. And so I think, employers should be willing to step up to the plate and to continue that, process over time into the, to level the playing field further.
Annie, I see you nodding. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just and I completely agree with everything you said, and I also think part of that is also touching upon what you said earlier, like changing employers' perceptions. And for my program specifically, when we convene all 650 young people for those MLK Mayor Menino leadership forums, we make every attempt to seat them at tables, and essentially how we have it in this room now, tables of 10, with people that they may not necessarily interact with in their neighborhoods. So you could have kids from Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, sitting with kids who live in or grew up in South End or Back Bay. And I think that really opens people's minds and changes perceptions. And it also makes individuals feel more comfortable working with people from different backgrounds, no matter it's race, gender, ethnic background, whatever. And also, I think down the line, it will require us to, if we really want to see scale up this impact, we really have to work very closely with the other summer jobs providers in our city too, to make sure that each summer builds upon their experience from the previous summer, so that there's continuous impact.
Yeah, and I would just add from the employer perspective at the PIC, we convene employers in a couple of different networks, and they absolutely agree that whether it's the Fed, whether it's Hancock, whether it's the hospitals, they really do see themselves as building out talent pipelines for the long haul. And that's one part of the work, but then there's also sort of the cultural, preparing the environment to receive the young people into the workplace. And there are some employers really thinking intentionally about the subtleties of things that happen at the workplace and what does that mean through the eyes and lens of a 16-year-old who goes to a high school 10 months of the year to then be placed in the summer. So more to come on that. Yes, in the back.
I'm Emily Aving from Harvard School of Public Health. I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about that. What, if anyone's looking at the impacts on the employers of hosting these youth and whether it results in any changes in the practices of the employers. And also, I was wondering if there are any differences in the experiences of the young people based on what kind of organization or what sector they're working in.
I guess I'll start with the first one because that's an item on our research agenda to get to. And mostly we'll be working with Joe at the PIC to look at the impact of having a private sector versus a public sector job, because lots of other cities look at Boston and are quite envious of the fact that we have a lot of private sector placements, and that's because we have the PIC is a tremendous intermediary in terms of vouching for youth, and the mayor gets out there every spring around this time, it's reminding employers it's summer job time, and it's time for them to hire. And those are commitments where the employers are paying the wages, right? So it's also, a huge policy tool in the sense that, we've seen the minimum wage increase over time, which means the city can serve fewer and fewer kids in subsidized jobs. So the more private sector jobs we get, the more cost efficient from the city standpoint the program becomes. And so that's something we'll be looking more carefully at. In terms of the impact on the employers, I actually don't think I've seen anyone studying that and looking at what that process means. And I think that's a really interesting question, especially given the way, youth are learning a lot about the world of work and how to behave at work. And then, a lot of these experiences are laddered. So even though ABCD randomly assigns their kids to jobs, they're sort of the first entry point into the summer job program. They mostly serve the younger teens, the 14 and 15-year-olds. And then after you've had an ABC job, a lot of times as a youth, you'll go and you'll apply to the PIC to get matched up with a job, because at the PIC, nothing's randomly assigned because they're, placing kids in private sector jobs, and you want to be able to send kids that are credible to State Street and MGH and things like that. And so you don't send a 14-year-old to State Street, right? You send that's maybe their second job or their third job. So they are learning, along the way. But it would be interesting to study and see how that does affect the employers and how they think about youth differently.
Afternoon. My question is about the model in terms of, I'm sorry, I should preface by saying I'm a Boston Pickle alumni, Boston Public School graduate, and a social worker today. I'm curious, because I mentor students and I help coach them for their career development. I'm curious if it's been looked at, like whether the students go to a job individually versus a cohort model. I remember when I had my PIC summer job, it was fun because there was a cohort of us going to, I want to say it was Home Depot in Somerville. So I'm wondering if anybody has looked at that data, because what I'm finding when I mentor young people, especially even ones who have graduated from college, if they haven't been connected to a program and part of a cohort model, it's kind of harder to navigate their career decisions and choices. Thank you.
Did you want to talk about?
Well, at Hancock, we also employ about 20 high school students that work within John Hancock as opposed to the nonprofit sites, and I completely agree with everything you just said. I'm a PIC alumni myself, and I also oversee our internal program, and I've noticed exactly that. They're just a lot more comfortable being around and having other peers that they can, like ask questions to, and also as a support network.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a deliberate intent to actually place people in cohorts. I think it depends on the employers, and I think that the city's happy to get any job for a young person that they can. But I think for the most part, from the data that I've seen, even at YEE, where you might have some smaller CBOs that are working with them, it's pretty rare to find one kid placed at a given job site. There's at least 2 or 3 typically. And I think that cohort component is really important, because kids are not only learning to about the world of work and having a supervisor and a boss and things like that, but they're also learning to work with their co-workers. And those co-workers are not just, older folks like us, but also their peers. And they're working with them in a different way, in a different environment than in school, right, where there's very clear rules about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't. And so one of the focus groups I did with kids from YOU who are all court involved. So the YOU program's got like maybe 100, 150 kids in it. Nothing's randomly assigned when you're court involved, right? Most of these jobs are all outside the city, because all these kids are gang-related, gang-affiliated, so they have to very carefully construct their cohorts and who's in them and where they are. And they do work in teams. And so the group that I interviewed, they worked out in Worcester painting lines on the parking lot. And they did have a job site supervisor, but a lot of the times it was left up to them to figure out who's cleaning the asphalt, who is painting the lines, which section they're going to start on, and things like that. And they explained to me, sometimes people show up at the job site and they don't want to do this and they don't want to do that, and you got to work it out, because if you don't, then your supervisor's going to be mad at you, or you're going to get fired or something, right? So they actually, learn how to manage some of these things when they're in cohorts of their peers. So I think that is important.
Do we have, I think we have time for one last question, maybe? Oh, gentleman up here.
So Chris Winship, Harvard. Just a quick comment on the incapacitation thing and then a question. At least when I was young, started working, I remember coming home like enormously tired. So I think it may not be incapacitation in the sense of time, but it may well be in terms of energy. So you presented the ITT effects, which I think is exactly appropriate, but was wondering kind of what the dropout rates are. I mean, you suggested that 25% of the kids who don't get, that are in the control group end up taking jobs. And I don't know how big the dropout is, and from that we could actually calculate what the local average treatment effect is, which I think probably nobody here knows what I'm talking about, but you do.
Yeah, and I do have those calculated out. I just don't show them because otherwise then we get into those distinctions. But it's really like a handful of kids that drop out during the summer. It's very, very small. I mean, like 5. And actually, most of the time, it's the only cases that I know of kids dropping out, like with that court-involved youth, because someone got arrested over the summer. And then you can't continue in the program, but he was back in the fall. So it's really small. So when we do the treatment on the treated, the local average treatment effects, they look very much like the ITT effects. And in terms of incapacitation, you're exactly right, but also for another reason. So when I did that focus group with the court-involved kids, they didn't mention fatigue, although I'm sure that's part of it because my teenager sleeps like a gazillion hours a night. But what they talked about, because I asked them about this, I was like, so you have this job during the day, but by the time you get back to the afternoon, everyone else is just rolling out of bed, right? And they talked about the fact that because they had a job, they could just go right from the job and they could go home and they could tell everybody, look, I got to get up early tomorrow, man. I have to be at 7:30. I got to be catching that van. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my job. And so that was their excuse for not going out at night and getting involved in everything that was going on. So it does have this effect of taking them out of their sort of usual habits, right, in terms of sort of disrupting those behavior patterns, but not exactly for, you just took them out of the system.
Very impressive effects. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, just to conclude, I'd like to thank Alicia, and Annie, and the audience.
Alicia.
And the audience. Yay. All right, thank you very much.
Oh, and Midori wants everyone to take one of these. So if you have any interest whatsoever, if you have any insomnia or whatever, please take one.